I never felt at home in London. I struggled to connect. It was like getting somebody to be as in love with you as you were with them.
Sure. So focus groups where you'd be sitting there with a dial and rating what you see. So they were that company, right? They're a huge company.
I feel like 20-year-olds watching this are going to be like, did they also send smoke signals?
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
It's
like dinosaur
dead.
age, right?
Yeah, it's amazing. You think you know things about the world and you've been a few places.
Mm-hmm.
And I had 100% underestimated the fact that there are cultural chasms between the way we live in the US and the way people live in Holland.
This episode is brought to you by EFG Hermes One, your one app for investing in more than 35 stock markets worldwide. This episode is also brought to you by Azza Fahmy Jewelry. Hi, I'm Malak Fouad, and welcome to the first episode of What I Did Next of 2026. You might already know that a key theme of the show is looking at people's pivot points and life journeys. This year, we're taking it a step further to also understand what people's expectations are of the future. You can hear more about that in our trailer at the beginning of this year for 2026. Today, I'm thrilled that Maria Shollenbarger is our first guest on the show. Maria is a travel editor at the Financial Times HTSI magazine. I got to know Maria last year at the Narrative Summit when I moderated a panel that she was on. We drove together from Cairo to Suma Bay and became instant friends, sharing life stories, laughs, and confidences. Maria has a sophisticated eye and an instinct for what travelers need and want. And we unpacked her industry in a lot of depth in our conversation. She's been with the FT now for 17 years and has always dreamed of being a travel writer and editor.
I started out as the deputy editor of HTSI, which was then called How to Spend It. It's the luxury supplement.
They don't call it How to Spend It anymore?
No, it was renamed to HTSI.
I still refer to it as How to Spend It.
I think a great part of the readers
do that.
a large contingent of readership still refers to it, but it is HTSI now, which I think is quite elegant. Jo Ellison, who's the current editor, took over at the end of 2019, and her salvo was an absolutely brilliant letter, just sort of saying like, this is not this has nothing to do with monetary value anymore. What we're talking about is time. Time is the most precious commodity we have. It's the luxury we have. I'm paraphrasing poorly because it was very, very. It kind of resonated with a lot of people. And at a certain point, we just said, it also looks really good as an acronym. It always seemed to me that people who didn't know the magazine HTSI, Wall Street Journal's WSJ, and people who do know it referred to it as HTSI anyway. We used to meet these kind of like fan people.
Sure.
Like, oh, HTSI. Yeah. I was like, oh, that's funny.
Well, it's also a very sort of, I don't want to say cliquey, but there's a lot of cachet to that magazine.
I think because there's a lot of cachet to the finance. Well, first of all, Joe's makes a brilliant magazine.
Yeah.
We, the team, but she had a vision that it's been almost a total change, but which came about in a very intuitive, gradual way. And I think that the magazine derives a lot of its cachet from the talent of the people making it, with her at the top, but also from the FT,
of course,
which is just our demographic is a built-in kind of really ideal prize demographic.
So you're American. Are you half British?
No.
I thought you're half something. You're not. You're fully American.
I think I just work on the diction because you get a lot of side eye in England if you don't.
Yeah.
I have to sort of work on water, or else people are like, water.
Water.
Yeah.
So I want to begin your kind of story, if you don't mind, from 1995 when you moved to New York. You wanted to work in magazines.
I had a very circuitous route to magazines.
Right. You worked in the ad world for a while.
Yes, I was in the ad world so I got to New York City and very, very fortunately, through a contact, the big sister of a friend of mine, I got an interview at Gourmet magazine, which was the great...
Condé Nast.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, and was like a very aspirational title in as much as it did high-end. It created food and wine as lifestyle.
I did an internship at Condé Nast.
In New York?
Yes, in 1993. So I was in university in the UK, and I got a 2-month internship at Condé Nast. And at the time, it was a fixed, one of these very corporate things, and they move you around to all the titles. And I would end up, one day I was a secretary for the vice president of advertising, and I couldn't type to save my life.
And I ended up take a typing test.
Yeah,
that was still the era.
It was still the time of that. I would have to.
That's not a good look, is it? I shouldn't even say that.
And I was so embarrassed because he had a letter he wanted to have sent out. And he was so patient with me, and he was in his, I don't know, late 50s, 60s. And I had to do it like 10 times before he was satisfied with it. And that was a typical job at the time. You're an intern, you'll do whatever they tell you to do.
Yeah.
But then I would have like really fun times where I'd be working on Glamour magazine. But I mean, I did everything. I remember I had one full day where I sat in a conference room on my own. They had given me a stack of mail, and all I had to do stick stamps
envelopes
onto an envelope.
Oh, same.
For a day.
Okay.
So, when I tell my kids, you have to start at the bottom, they don't get it.
I don't think that bottom exists anymore.
I don't think it exists anymore
I literally
either.
don't think it exists. Yeah. I think if I asked somebody to get me a coffee, I would be, not that I ever would.
You'd be shot.
No, or
yeah.
just I'd go upstairs and have a word with HR, not at the FT,
absolutely.
But just generally, I think it's a very different world. I actually think that's great that it's, and I think some of that was accelerated by that. Wasn't there a lawsuit at Condé about interns?
I'm sure there was.
Sort of,
I'm sure there was.
Indentured servitude.
I'm sure there was, because we were really doing a lot of grunt work.
Yeah.
A lot of grunt work.
On the other hand, I think it inculcated a work ethic that I'm glad I have. Not that that can't be inculcated other ways, but I feel like...
we were not, what do they call them? Snowflakes. We were not the snowflake generation. We did what we were told to do, right? So you were at Gourmet.
No, because so I arrived in New York with a very finite amount. My mother and father's position was a little bit like, we just paid for this very nice university and the master's degree that followed it.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Yeah, you're on your own. So I sold my car and flew back to New York and had a finite amount of money in my little kitty. And New York's, the costs, associated with life in New York were, it was pretty. So I interviewed very briefly at Sotheby's, actually, which I thought I might want to be.
Because you had done art history,
I had done art history
and
Italian.
In love with art history.
Exactly. Both degrees. And that it very quickly became clear that was not, I think it paid like $15,000 a year. My dad was like,
it's a prestigious job, yeah.
And yes. And then I got the interview at Gourmet with Gales Wiegenthal, who was then the editor-in-chief. And it was many, 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 many weeks in typical Condé Nast fashion. Come back for the typing test, come back to meet this junior associate editor who wants to talk to you, then the art director. And in the meantime, my best friend from Middlebury, from college, had gotten a job as a copywriter at McCann Erickson by a very effective headhunter. And she said, God, I was getting worried about money and fretting about what am I going to do?
Sure,
I can't go back to California with my tail between my legs.
I sold my car as well.
I know. But I remember when I called the managing editor of Gourmet to say, it had been 8 weeks of going in to see them and typing tests and this one and that one and sort of money going out the door.
Sure.
And I finally rang her and just said, I have a job offer and it's obviously I would much rather be here, but I'm starting out. I have this situation. And the response was a little bit, this woman was perfectly nice, but the response was a little bit, well, if you don't understand
how amazing we are.
Yeah. If you can't wait.
But that was a Condé Nast way.
And there were a lot of messages inherent in that. Like,
that was a Condé Nast way.
Like, I'm not independent. It was a job very often for people who had the means to kind of wait 6 months to know,
And whose salary didn't matter if they joined Condé Nast
a little
anyway.
Bit, yeah.
I mean,
this one actually paid reasonably well for what it was, and it was my dream job. It was being the assistant editor, the editorial assistant to the travel editor, and a couple of the food and wine editors. Yeah. The dream. It would have been.
Then,
and I do sometimes think about what my life would look like now if I'd kind of waited it out.
That's what this show is about, by the way. But it's interesting. You had your heart set on travel even then.
Yeah, if you'd asked me what I wanted to do, my little naive self coming out of college, I wanted to work at Condé Nast Traveler. I said I want to go because I had a few languages. I thought this is I knew publishing was what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
Publishing that involved writing and editing was what I've known that since I was 7. And I used to write little extra credit reports,
Yeah.
So then the internet happened in New York. And the way
you were at McCann at that time?
I was at McCann. The way it manifested in my sphere was that people on the marketing side of things were making the jump into it, and people on the editorial side of things were making the jump into it, collaborating on content creation.
Sure.
It was that was when that term entered my consciousness. I don't know about you. And there were so magazine editors were going over to Estee Lauder launched a giant proposition called Gloss, which I ended up working at a certain point. And there was a network called Oxygen Media.
I remember
that Oprah and Jerry Laybourne, who founded Nickelodeon.
Yep.
So I was hired to be the marketing manager because I came from the commercial side and marketing as far as they were concerned.
Sure.
And it was run by the woman who had founded Allure magazine, Martha McCulley. She hired me to be the marketing manager, which involved writing a lot of marketing copy. She quickly decided that she liked me. I adored her. She's remained one of my professional mentors.
So I mirrored you a little bit. I left journalism. I was at the Daily Mail. Yeah, which I did not enjoy. But I jumped out of that world and I went into market research and consulting, media consulting. And just as the internet was becoming a thing.
Oh, not crashing. Okay.
No, at the beginning. So it was in 1999 that I joined this company. It was an American company called Frank Magid, very well known in the States as being a company that advises anchors on TV. They would train anchors about how to be on TV. And they would do like the Nielsen ratings. So focus groups where you'd be sitting there with a dial and rating what you see. So they were that company, right? They're a huge company.
I feel like 20-year-olds watching this are going to be like, did they also send smoke signals?
Yeah, exactly. It's like dinosaur age, right?
Yeah. And I think the internet had allowed since its inception people to click and buy. And then this idea of it was very aspirational what they did at Gloss. And because it was owned by the Lauder family, it was extremely well funded. So I got very lucky because Martha went to Gloss first. And then when my position, I went to work from the beauty side to the entertainment side, but soon enough I was kind of out the door as well.
But it's a very good grounding, I think, to be in an environment, because I did that too. You're in an environment which you're riding this wave where everything is happening and there's a lot of money and it's a new industry that you're riding the wave of, and then it crashes.
It always felt precarious to me. I mean,
it did.
I do remember slightly, there was so much rah-rah around, I can say it now because it basically doesn't exist, not to sound too sour, but like, there was so much like, women, rah-rah, look what we're doing. Yeah. And I was always slightly like, who's minding the shop here? I don't understand, and just people were moving like chess pieces all over the company. And I was like, this person was hired to be a business development director. Now they're editorial director. I don't get this
absolutely
at all,
absolutely.
I think this happened. This was a paradigm. This happened to a lot of us.
It did.
I got very lucky in that I followed Martha to Gloss from Oxygen. Yeah. She looked out for me or saw what she recognized as a certain kind of talent she wanted to
nurture.
Yeah, to nurture, but also just we complement each other. Let's go along together. Then she left Gloss to go be the executive editor of InStyle magazine. And I eventually went and joined her there because these magazines used to do these, you probably remember, the sort of 156 best beauty buys of the year, which were mega in the beauty industry because it was a little imprimatur of excellence and it meant a lot for them.
And at the time, Maria, InStyle was very much a print publication still.
Print hadn't started its really sad descent yet. It was the writing was a bit on the wall, but we were still doing quite well. And it was timing in style. And then I went to Real Simple after that for a couple of years. My old friend Pilar liked to say that it was like the timing was like the Harvard Business School. I mean, you just learned how to write an assigning memo. You learned how to look at commercial numbers with your commercial team. It was a very, very good training. And then I went to Travel and Leisure, and I was there for from 2005 to 2007 when I moved to Holland because I had met this guy. I was sort of allowed, my side hustle was I was allowed to write for Interior Design magazine, which was sort of like an FT of the interior, like a business to business magazine, but that was also read by consumers because it was very beautiful and kind of aspirational and high end. And I wrote an article about this Dutch architect who had built this very cool building in The Hague. He and his partner used to work for Remkoolhaus, and then they kind of went their own way and opened their own firm. And he came over to New York and said, I'd love to take you out for a drink as a thank you for the article. We met. We started seeing each other long distance. That lasted about a year. And I slightly thought I'd been in New York for 13 years, which felt like 5 or 6 too many.
But New York has a shelf life.
I think, yes. I mean, for me, it did. Yeah. A lot of people feel the opposite. They never want to leave. For me, it was like, it just took a lot out of me. Yeah. It was a very difficult city to live in if you were on as was London, if you're on a journalist salary, kind of.
It's not an easy place to be.
When we come back after the break, Maria opens up about her personal journey that led her to London, Singapore, and back to Europe.
And of course, she takes our lightning round at the end of our conversation. This episode is brought to you by EFG Hermes One, your one app for investment across more than 35 stock markets worldwide. With EFG Hermes One, you can buy and sell orders in real time for immediate execution across multiple global markets. You can keep track of your favorite stocks by creating and customizing multiple watch lists and make informed investment decisions with their advanced technical analysis tools to study market trends and investor behavior. So supercharge your financial journey and download the EFG Hermes One app on the Apple App Store and on Google Play and start investing today. Welcome back to the first part of my conversation with travel editor and writer Maria Shollenbarger. So you followed the guy.
I followed the guy, and very, very fortunately for me, Nancy Novograd made me the European editor at large of the magazine, which was great. And I worked out of our house in Rotterdam, and my boyfriend and I lasted only about 15 months, just because we weren't right for each other. But also, it's amazing. You think you know things about the world, and you've been a few places, and I had 100% underestimated the fact that there are cultural chasms between the way we live in the US and the way people live in Holland.
Yeah.
And more to the point, I moved into his house.
Sure. And you think it's forever. It's like you're ever after. At the time when you moved, right?
No.
No,
I didn't know for sure whether we were going to be together.
Okay.
And in point of fact, I thought this is an experiment. I really like this person, but I want to just sort of see. I think I had a woman, a friend whom I really like and whose view of the world I really trust. And she, afterwards, I was a little bit like, oh, woe was me, because when we broke up, it was he who did the breaking up and was seeing someone else.
Right.
And I was a little bit like, and she was like, oh, you just wanted to get out of New York. Like, don't be such a baby. You used him to get over there. I was like, okay.
Oh, interesting take.
Yeah. I don't know if it's entirely true.
But there might have been a point of it. Yeah, a small amount
situation.
Yeah. This, for me, is your classic sliding doors moment. If you had not left New York, or if your relationship hadn't fallen apart in Rotterdam, you might still be there with 3 kids. Who knows what that,
Yeah.
I always wonder about these questions.
It's interesting. I think there are people who don't wonder. So
I
wonder a lot
but
about
I know
these
there are
things.
people
I think
who
there are
just don't
people who
think.
just sort of, I've always had the sense, which may not be true, I've always had the sense that they're more effective than I am. That the kind of person who can shut the sliding door is just getting on with it and getting stuff done, whereas I'm sitting at my desk still thinking.
But Maria, those are people who live an unexamined life.
Well, I think maybe they examine other, also like
I don't
you can
know,
only
though.
shut the door for so long, stuff. But anyway, I think that it was, I knew that I had always wanted to live in London. So I knew that, like, with him or without him.
So you decided to move anyway?
I went anyway.
Yeah. Did you move to the FT at that point?
No. I'd worked for a company called Travel Intelligence, but only for 4 or 5 months before I got the deputy editor position of HTSI.
That's a big jump.
It was
into that.
It was complete serendipity. I was visiting my parents in Sicily. They had rented a house in Sicily.
Right.
And my brother and his partner, Sarah, came over, and I went down 2009. I went down and saw them. And while we were out to dinner, I had the email from the consulate that my visa had come through.
Nice.
And then 1 or 2 days later, Gillian de Bono, who was the editor of HTSI, said, my deputy editor has left, and I wondered if you would be interested in putting yourself forward for the position. I don't know what your paperwork situation is. We can't sponsor you at the FT, but if you have your own, and I just sort of thought, like,
wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, it was a
when
very,
it just falls
I have
into
to say,
place like that.
Because you come off of a relationship ending. I mean, I was 38 or 39. It was, even though it wasn't the end of my world that he ended the relationship, it's definitely.
Yeah, it's an important door closing.
Well, and also, like, it bruises your.
Of course.
You're just like, it was not very. It was not a great moment.
Of course.
So this was a very nice way.
A nice
and also,
vindication
I mean, I
for you.
remember thinking when I got to London, like, I just want to be working all the time.
Yeah.
I want to get my mind off of all of this, restart, because I had to, like, ship everything over from all my business had gone over to Europe from New York, and now I had to ship it again up to London. And so those were 4 very fun years.
And then you moved to Asia. You met someone else.
Then I think that this is common to the magazine experience for lots of people, the higher up you are on the masthead, sometimes the less creative the job can be or feel, unless you're at a super dynamic title. I hadn't written in a long time, and I sort of went to Jillian and I said, this is not as satisfying. And she said, I know, I understand, you know, let's give me another 2 or 3 months to sort of, and in the meantime, the editorship of Condé Nast Traveler was up. Sarah Miller had stepped away, and my name came up for that. I didn't get the Traveler role. Brilliant Melinda Stevens got it, which was great and deserved, and she did an amazing job. And so I went to Jillian and I said, I think
I need to step back a bit.
And she said, I knew you were coming and I've been thinking about this. What would you say if I put you on a contract as the travel editor?
Nice.
You can write across the magazine, you can pitch design stories, art collecting, and you'll continue to write the Travelista column and I'll pay you X amount. It was like an editor at large. It was a win-win.
Yeah.
It was a win-win.
Yeah.
And then I met
your next partner.
Yeah.
Yep.
And we dated for about a year and a half, and then I moved down to Singapore.
And then another turning point for you there.
Yes.
Another big turning point.
I mean, not just living in Asia, which I hadn't.
You hadn't envisaged that for yourself.
Not really.
Yeah.
I mean, I was always sort of like, I'll go anywhere that there's something interesting to do or learn or work at.
And Singapore is a good, I think, melting pot in Asia because you've got so many cultures there as well.
It is. I mean, it's also sort of anodyne. I remember my first month or two that I was there, I would get a sinking feeling every once in a while. I grew to really, really, really love it.
On the surface, it's like the Dubai of Asia.
Probably more in Singapore historically than Dubai. There's always been this very interesting creative class because architects and designers were based there.
And you have that deep Chinese element, the deep Malaysian element.
And there's a big Tamil culture there. I mean, there's a lot going on there. I'd lived in New York and London, so I sort of thought, gosh, this isn't, London, you walk out your door and 20 things hit you in the face to do. There's this free show and go see this band and eat at this place. And Singapore, you had to dig in my personal experience, you had to dig quite a bit more. What was and is, and I hope always will be lovely about Singapore is it's the graciousness that permeates the culture. It's just a very civilized, civil.
It's a graceful society.
A civil, yes. And I mean, the common good is a very important. I mean, I think
that community
obviously
element.
It was founded on some of these precepts, but it's just a very lovely. I loved the weather. I loved being able to hop on a plane. On Monday we'd say let's go to Cambodia and hop on a plane because the access was really great. And he and I had a really, really nice time.
Had a good life.
He had a very interesting job at a hotel company. So.
Yeah, and then the relationship didn't work out.
It did not.
And similar reasons to the first one.
Correct.
So how did that feel for you when, having this?
Well, it didn't work out in part because I was summoned back up to London by Jillian, who was retiring, who wanted to try to position me to be the editor of the magazine. And so I was in that mix, but it entailed me moving back up to London on a contract for 8 months.
Right.
At a time which I didn't know. Shortly after I agreed to do this, my now ex-partner was offered a very, very senior role at Six Senses Hotels, which was based in Bangkok.
Sure.
So we were meant to move to Bangkok, and he was sort of like, okay, isn't this great? I've got my dream job.
And your dream job was on the other side of the world.
Yes, but I think implicit in that statement was sort of like, so you're going to come home and be in Bangkok with me, right? And I'm like, but my dream job, and I moved to Singapore for you, and these conversations.
Yeah, and these
the long and short of it is, I stayed for several months. I think that was the moment when it just became clear we were engaged. I think the moment it became clear it wasn't going to work, the wheels started to come off the bus of the relationship.
I wonder, and I'm sure you've thought about it, if that out of the job wasn't there, would the wheels have come off the relationship?
I can't name the shelf life of that relationship.
Sure.
I mean, I don't know what would have happened.
Sure.
I was very conflicted about the decision.
Yeah.
I think that I'm happy things worked out the way they did, because then, we split up. I left Asia, but again, it was sort of like, Jesus Christ, excuse my language, never moving across the world
for another guy
for
again.
A person again, ever. And the interesting thing was when we split, something that I had always worried about, that he assured me wasn't a problem, it turned out had been in fact a problem, which was this, all the things that had been so interesting in the beginning were liabilities by the end. You're always gone. You're never here. When I'm home, you're working. We can't travel together. And that had been the case. It was part and parcel of the job.
Of course.
Ended up not working for this relationship.
Yeah.
But what was kind of like, oh God, again, was the realization I was back to being a single income situation.
Yep.
I was going to have to move all my stuff back up to Europe. I knew I didn't want to go back to London because this was only 3 years after Brexit. I mean, I still would have been
they were very hard 3 years in the UK
direction.
as well.
Yeah.
They were very hard years in the UK.
They were not fun.
No, they were not fun at all.
And it would not have been fun to move back there.
Sure.
So I moved to Rome and just kind of set up. This was right before the turn of the year into 2020. And then I went on a very long trip to India because I had a great assignment. And I came back and it was the 5th of March. And I was gone for 17 or 18 days. And it was really, I landed and there was no one in Fiumicino airport.
Yeah.
I think I saw one other person and it was quite scary.
It's eerie.
Very. I got back to my house. I was meant to go away again the next day to Spain to Shaw Wellness Clinic. And I sat down, I was like, do I go? And I was like, there's no way I'm missing a week of like
in a spa.
Every therapy.
Absolutely.
But yeah, so I went.
Yeah.
3 days later, Italy closed its borders. And then it was just like dominoes going down. I don't know if it's easy to forget how intense it was in the first wave, but it was, they came to me at Shaw and they were like, Signora, you got to get out of here. Like go stay with friends in Madrid. I was like, I don't have any friends in Madrid. Yeah. My dad rang and he's like, here's your decision made for you. Donald Trump's closing the border on Friday.
You come home. So you went to live with your parents.
Yes.
And you thought it would be a temporary thing. And you wrote a very poignant from the heart piece for the FT, how you were faced with this complete reassessment of your life. In it, you say, because I did always want to live everywhere and succeeded to some degree. In the past 15 years, I've had addresses in 5 countries and traveled to dozens of others. But it transpires as an occupational hazard of itinerant life, one I wish I could have warned that 20-year-old about, a kind of free-floating homesickness. It's been the privilege of a lifetime to immerse in parts of the world so far away from the one I was born in. But to live in many elsewheres is to feel slightly displaced everywhere, even the place that's putatively home. So that was 2020.
Yeah.
Do you still feel that you feel a bit disconnected from wherever you go? Because you spend now a lot of your time in Florence. You're spending a lot more time in Cairo. Do you feel a little bit detached from wherever it is you go?
It's not so much detachment. Detachment is maybe not the word. It's that I struggle to know which is to be very honest, I was in Rome for 3.5 years, almost 4 years before I then went up to Florence. When I'm not in London, this was like the base that I chose. And Rome, like if I can finally get my paperwork all sorted, like Rome is where I feel very, very rooted there.
Yeah.
I have really good friends there who constitute family in the way that somebody
So
who's
Rome would be your preference over Florence?
Yes.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
I thought Florence trumped it for you. Okay.
Sorry, Florentine.
It's too parochial, too provincial.
Not my words.
My words. My words.
No, it's just I'd studied in Florence when I was younger, and it's also because I have history there.
Mm-hmm.
I'm constantly reminded of the context of being a 20-year-old, a 23-year-old from studying, which I, more than maybe even I'm consciously aware, is present. Rome was like a new place, a new setup. I mean, Rome's just more fun. And it's because of the medieval dimensions. Rome just absorbs it better.
Mm.
I mean, Rome suffers egregious over-tourism also, but it's just...
It absorbs it better.
And there's a wider, more kind of far more diverse swath of people. There's people who work in cinema. There's people who are artists.
And
there's
you
people
have the
who are art
NGO
galleries.
world,
you
the
have
UN
the
world.
diplomatic world. Correspondents are all there. It's kind of, which is in that way it's much more parallel to Cairo.
Exactly.
I never felt at home in London. It made sense very much as a base work-wise, and it's obviously I struggled to connect. It was like getting somebody to be as in love with you as you were with them.
Sure, you're trying to force it.
Yeah.
How do you see the future for yourself? How are you going to balance this more? Do you want to put down roots somewhere? Do you want to be somewhere where you are there permanently?
I think so. I think ideally would be 2 places, and also my parents are growing old, and I've thought about whether eventually I'm going to be back in California for a few years, just because I left when I was 18 and I have not lived back. I lived there for 8 months before I moved to New York City as kind of a stopgap.
Sure.
And then for many of those years, I really, if I saw them once a year, it was kind of,
Oh, wow.
yeah, I really would like to spend time with them, which is complicated by my tax status. You can't spend more than 35 days a year in the U.S. if you're residing elsewhere.
Sure.
Makes it really complicated. They're amazing people.
Yeah.
The older I get, the more I understand the privilege of having parents who are people you actually really desire to spend
time with. Yeah. Yeah. I've been lucky that way too.
It's really,
it's very special.
Your mom is amazing.
Yeah, you guys were buddies in Siwa.
I loved her.
Yeah.
So I have more of an idea of what I would like my life to look like, which is pure fantasy, that it's like me in a house somewhere in the country with dogs, horses,
And
a
which
donkey,
country?
chickens.
Like countryside where?
I think I don't know if it's going to be back in the
Roman
United States. I'm
countryside?
not, if it could, I'm not overly, but also realistically, I quite like the idea of some sort of communal structure. I mean, my friends and I sort of half joke about it all the time. We're going to pool our resources when the husbands are gone, and we're going to have...
So funny you say that. I was talking about that with a girlfriend the other day, a few girlfriends actually, and we were saying just that. But they're girls who live in London.
Yeah.
And so for them it was Cornwall. Let's buy some houses near each other on a cliff, and when we need assisted living, and we're all living together.
Yeah, but you need like a little cottage in Andalusia or something.
Yeah,
somewhere warmer. Cornwall's very beautiful.
Somewhere warmer.
Exactly.
Somewhere warmer. Yeah. So we're going to do the lightning round, but before we do that, I've just thought of something I want to ask you. What are the must-haves that you pack when you're traveling on business? Like, let's say you're gone for a week. What are the non-negotiables in your suitcase?
Melatonin, turmeric, a good white shirt, like a good crisp white shirt, my black leather pants, leggings, if it's not high summer, because they can be like...
You can dress them up and down.
Completely. You put them on with trainers and it's street all day, and you can wear them out to a black tie thing if you have to. And a really, really good like a $10 kaftan from the market in Essaouira that is the most comfortable nightgown on the planet.
Nice. And beauty regime, do you like have things that you have to have with you, or are you much more sort of happy-go-lucky when you're traveling?
I feel better if I've got my Barbara Sturm creams. I just feel like it's kind of holding...
Yeah.
The way other women or people, I think, sometimes feel like they've got this one piece of clothing on that's the armor that anchors them. I feel like I've got my life together if I kind of have my creams on.
I think also because you travel so much, they must be like talismans, things that you just hold on to, like to keep you rooted almost, right? Lightning round.
Okay.
And these are some new questions I'm adding for this coming year.
Oh my goodness. Okay.
Yes. What's your most used emoji?
Right now, it's the one with the spiral, holy shit, I'm going crazy eyes.
I love that one.
Sorry.
I love that one. That's a good one. If you had 25 hours in a day, how would you use that extra hour?
Writing for myself that no one else reads, no one else edits.
I like that. Like a diary?
No, just writing stuff that I would like to put together one day, but that nobody edits, nobody touches, just mine.
And what kind of stuff
could be my Substack. Like,
do you
need
have
to
a
get
Substack?
on that. No, but I'm about to launch one.
I'm thinking of doing that too.
I'm about to launch one. So,
but what their musings on life, your thoughts about a new destination? What are we talking about?
Anything that it's like, Julia Cameron, The Artist's Way.
Yeah.
Just the 3 pages that you do in the morning. Probably slightly more like an end of day version of that.
Looking ahead, what is something you're excited about?
India. I'm going to India next week.
But you've been many times.
Yes, but I'm going to Khajuraho, where I've never been.
All right.
Very excited.
Looking ahead, what is something you're concerned about or anxious about?
I'm anxious about the midterms in the United States. I mean, a lot can happen between now and November. I'm extremely concerned about the state of democracy in the U.S.
Yeah. What country are you dying to visit to that you've never been to?
Dying to visit? Yeah. There's a few clangers in people are shocked when they hear I've never been to Japan. Mortified. My boss was like, I can't. But Japan, one of those countries that's so culturally nuanced that really one should send a journalist who has lived there or understands it.
But I suppose you don't travel for pleasure, do you?
I did this summer. I went on a road trip around the south of Italy that was really fun, which then ended up becoming an article because...
That's how it goes, yeah.
What was the question? The country I'm really excited to visit?
Or the one you're dying to visit that you haven't been to yet. That's fine. You mentioned it, Japan.
No, I'm not. But I'm embarrassed. I'm not dying to go there.
Oh, you're not dying
to. It's not like number one. If I had to name number one, it was Egypt for a long time.
Yeah.
Now I've been here a lot these past years.
You know Europe well. What about South America? Have you been? Peru. Nice.
I would love to go to Russia. I would have loved to spend time in Russia, but
Interesting. If you were to do another profession, what would you pick?
Interior designer.
Actually, your Instagram page, you're always focusing when you've got your pictures of various properties that you're staying in, various hotels, you're always zooming in on that. So it's interesting that you say that.
And I just think I love to occasionally think like proper foreign correspondent, like not a leisure darling.
Yeah.
But I just, I get the eye roll a lot when I say that.
That
so
was
I think
my
probably
sliding
other
door
people
moment.
don't think that's what I'm cut up for.
I would have loved to do that too. That was my big passion.
I almost went to foreign service school. I really wanted to apply to Georgetown. I thought about being a diplomat.
I think you told me that. For me, it was the UN. What's your favorite activity?
Walking. Just walking in the countryside. One of my absolute favorite things about Florence, which I will miss deeply, is that because it's small and quite contained, where I happen to live, I walk up the hill, out the old portone of the city, and in 15 minutes on foot, I'm in like English patient.
How gorgeous.
Really, 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 really. It sets me right in my head. If I can't go to the gym or I can't run anymore, I've shot my knees, middle-aged woman.
Yeah.
So you're breathing incredible air. Yeah.
It ticks that box.
And then I loved cooking when I lived in Rome.
But walking will see you through until your old age. It's amazing. It's amazing.
It does.
Yeah. Least favorite activity?
Oh my God, doing my taxes. Anything finance related.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, last two questions. I'm going to begin a sentence. I want you to end it. I have a hard time
pulling the trigger on things when they're scary, like for myself, going and doing something that I really want to do. In some ways, I do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Last one. I get joy from
friends.
If you've enjoyed this episode, stay tuned next week for part 2 with Maria, where we discuss the travel industry in much more depth. Thanks for joining me today on What I Did Next. This is Malak Fouad, your host, and the episode was produced by Chirag Desai. We'll see you again next week.